catch yourself, like when you're reading the news about some big company merger or whatever, and you just kind of wonder, like, how much power do these corporations actually have?
It's a question people have been asking for over a century, seriously. And today we're really going to dive deep into all those complexities.
Okay, so corporate power. That's pretty broad, though, right? Where do we even start?
You're right, it is a big one. But there's this concept, kind of like at the root of it all, something that shapes how we even think about corporations in the first place, and that's corporate personhood.
Corporate personhood. Sounds kind of like something you'd hear in a philosophy class, not something that, like, affects our everyday lives.
I hear you, but trust me on this. It gets really interesting. To see how it plays out in our lives, we kind of got to go back to the beginning, way back to 19th century legal theory.
Okay, back to law school. I'm ready. Lay it on me.
All right, so picture this. You've got these scholars like Savigny and Guerquet, and they're wrestling with this really basic question. How do you define a corporation, which is this intangible thing, as its own legal entity, separate from the actual people who own it and run it?
So are we talking about the difference between, say, a small business owner who is their business versus like a massive company with a board and shareholders and all that?
Exactly. Because, see, before this whole corporate personhood thing took hold, every time a corporation wanted to do something legally binding, like buy property or enter into a contract, it needed action from every single shareholder.
Oh, wow. I see what you mean. Talk about a logistical nightmare.
Right. Talk about inefficient. So corporate personhood emerged as a way to streamline things. Suddenly, corporations could own property, make contracts, navigate the whole marketplace, all without needing a shareholder vote at every single turn.
Okay, that makes sense. Simplifying things. But somewhere along the line, it seems like this legal tool, this convenience, kind of morphed into something bigger, more powerful. I mean, our research keeps mentioning the Citizens United case as this major turning point. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, Citizens United is huge for a reason.
Yeah.
Because what it did was basically say that corporations have the same free speech rights as individuals, specifically when it comes to spending money on politics.
And that just blew the whole debate about corporate money in politics wide open. So let's talk about those arguments, the ones for and against corporate personhood. What are people saying?
Well, imagine a boxing ring, because that's kind of what this debate feels like sometimes. On one side, you've got folks who argue that corporate personhood is crucial for protecting businesses from government overreach. They're saying it's the backbone of economic growth, and after all, corporations are just groups of people with shared interests pooling their resources.
Right, I can see that argument for sure.
But then in the other corner, you've got critics coming out swinging, saying this gives corporations an unfair advantage in politics.
Yeah.
They argue it allows corporations to drown out the voices of everyday citizens with their massive spending power. It's like tilting the playing field.
So it boils down to whether this thing, corporate personhood, which started as a way to streamline business, is now a tool for corporations to wield undue influence.
You got it. And the debate gets even more heated when you bring in the argument that personhood, like real personhood, should be reserved for actual human beings, not these abstract legal entities. Corporations, unlike us, they can theoretically exist forever, amass tons of wealth, even live in multiple places at once. Critics say that changes what it even means to participate in a democracy.
Yeah, that is a lot to unpack. No easy answers there, which I guess explains why it's still such a hot topic. But here's where our dive takes a turn, because get this, our research also points to movements out there fighting for legal rights, for ecosystems.
That's right. We're talking about rivers, entire watersheds, even, get this, an endangered salamander showing up as plaintiffs in court cases.
Wait, hold up. A salamander with a lawyer. How does that even work, legally speaking?
I know, it's wild, right? But basically, it comes down to this idea. Our environment, these natural systems that we depend on, they have inherent value, and they deserve protection. These movements are saying, hey, instead of just arguing about whether a company can pollute, let's give nature itself a legal voice, a way to defend itself.
So it's not just don't pollute. It's about recognizing that a river has a right to exist. A forest has a right to thrive.
Exactly. And one group that's really at the forefront of this is the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, CELDF. They're doing groundbreaking work, helping communities rewrite local laws to acknowledge these rights, often putting them directly at odds with corporate interests, which is where things get really interesting.
Okay, so we started with corporations as legal persons, and now we're talking about ecosystems having rights. It's like this concept of personhood, this legal tool that was about making business more efficient, is now at the center of these huge philosophical questions about rights, about power, about what it even means to be a person at all.
It's a question that's going to keep popping up as we go deeper, and one I think you'll find fascinating given your interest in how power works in the corporate world. But before we get too far down that rabbit hole, let's look at a specific example, a court case, where all this is playing out in real time. It's funny, when you look at the legal arguments, the ones these groups are using to fight for ecosystems' rights, they actually have a lot in common with the arguments that were used to create corporate personhood in the first place.
Okay, now that's a connection I wouldn't have made. How do those two things even relate? They seem so different.
Well, think back to those early proponents of corporate personhood. What were they all about? Streamlining business, limiting liability, making the whole system run more smoothly, right? These new movements, the ones pushing for ecosystems' rights, they're also trying to stretch the limits of this personhood idea, but for different goals entirely, like environmental protection, giving communities more power.
So it's like same playbook, totally different game.
Exactly. It's like they're doing judo, using the system's own weight against it. They're taking this existing legal framework and flipping it on its head to do something totally unexpected.
I'm starting to get why you said this goes to the very definition of person. It's like we're stretching that category to include things that were totally off the radar before.
And that's where things get kind of philosophically messy, right? Because if a corporation can be a person and a river can be a person, what does that even mean, person? Do you have to be conscious, self-aware? Or is it just about having certain rights and responsibilities, legal ones? It's interesting. Our sources really get into the weeds on this one, philosophically speaking.
One idea that jumped out at me was this juridical unconscious thing. That sounds like something out of a dream.
I know, right? It does have a kind of mysterious ring to it.
Yeah.
It's the work of this legal scholar, Shoshana Feldman. Basically, she's saying that legal systems, they've got these hidden dimensions, these underlying assumptions that shape how we understand justice, how we think about rights, even when we're not consciously aware of them.
So it's like we're all playing by a set of rules that we never even agreed to in the first place.
Exactly. And what these new movements are doing is they're forcing us to confront those assumptions, to ask, do these rules still make sense in a world where we're facing climate change, mass extinction, all these unprecedented environmental threats?
It's like the ground is shifting under our feet, legally speaking. But let's bring this back down to earth for a sec. Can you give us an example of a case where these battles over personhood, where it's actually happening right now?
Absolutely. One that's really interesting. It's playing out right now, as we speak, in Grant Township, Pennsylvania. Small rural community. And they're locked in this legal battle with a company called Pennsylvania General Energy, PGE.
Okay, so what's the conflict? What's PGE doing?
They want to inject wastewater. And we're talking about wastewater from fracking operations into this underground injection well. And it's right there in Grant Township. The township, though, they're not having it. They're fighting back.
So how are they doing that? What's their strategy, legally speaking?
They did something super innovative. They rewrote their local laws, and they did it specifically to recognize the rights of the Little Mahoning watershed, which is the one that would be directly affected by this injection well.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying the watershed itself is like part of this case?
That's the idea.
Yeah.
They're arguing that the watershed has its own right to exist, a right to be free from this pollution, and that PGE's plan, it totally violates those rights.
That's a bold move. But I'm guessing PGE isn't just going to roll over on this, right?
Of course not. They're arguing that a watershed, you can't be a person, like legally speaking. They're saying it's absurd to think a river could have rights. And they're pointing to these past cases, like there was one, Hawaiian Crow v. Lujan, where animals tried to be plaintiffs and it didn't fly.
So it's this total clash of worldviews, right? This traditional view where only humans and corporations have rights versus this new idea that ecosystems are legal entities too. What happens in Grant Township, that could change things for everyone.
For sure. If Grant Township wins, it sets a huge precedent. Like, it could open the floodgates for similar cases all over. Communities would see, hey, here's another way to protect ourselves, to protect our environment from corporate harm.
This is complicated stuff. How do courts even begin to process this? I mean, these are such different ways of thinking about personhood.
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
It's something legal experts, philosophers, they're all struggling with. I think one of the biggest challenges is how do you even define harm when it comes to an ecosystem? We usually think about harm like a person got hurt or property was damaged. But when it's a whole ecosystem, It's not so simple.
Yeah, like how do you put a number on damage to a river or to a forest? How do you make that something a court can act on?
It's tough. And that's where scientists come in, right? Ecologists, biologists, hydrologists, those folks. They're the ones who can provide the evidence to show what pollution does, what a habitat destruction, climate change, all of that, what it's really doing.
So we're almost talking about creating this whole new legal language, a new way to understand and talk about humans and the natural world as part of the same system.
Totally. And this new way of talking, it forces us to rethink some really old assumptions about who or what deserves legal protection. Actually, one of the articles we read, it makes this fascinating comparison between this, trying to get rights for ecosystems, and the fight to abolish slavery.
Whoa, okay, I don't see the connection. How do those two things relate?
Think about it for a minute. For centuries, enslaved people were seen as property, not people, right? Abolitionists, they argued that that was morally wrong, that every human being inherently has rights. And eventually, it was a long, difficult fight. But they changed the legal system to reflect that.
So are you saying these environmental activists, they're making the same argument about nature, that seeing it as just property, that's the fundamental mistake, that it has inherent rights?
It's a powerful analogy, right? And it makes you think about our moral responsibilities to the planet, to the environment. If we say, yes, ecosystems have inherent rights, that changes everything. How we regulate the environment, how we use resources, everything has to be looked at differently.
It's like we're at this fork in the road, you know. One path, we keep doing what we're doing, treating nature like it's ours to exploit however we want. The other path, we acknowledge its value, we protect it legally like it deserves.
And the stakes are huge. The future of the planet, literally the well-being of everyone, it could depend on what path we choose. But, this whole back and forth about personhood, it's not just about expanding the category, making it bigger. There's another movement. It's trying to go the opposite direction, to roll back some of the rights and privileges that these corporate persons have.
So it's like a two-front battle, expanding personhood for some, contracting it for others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's playing out in some really interesting ways. Like you've got groups pushing for constitutional amendments to make it crystal clear that corporations don't have the same rights as individuals, especially when it comes to political spending.
Which takes us right back to Citizens United.
Full circle. They're saying Citizens United, it tipped the scales too far in favor of corporations, gave them too much power in politics. And now they're trying to rebalance things.
I bet that's just as controversial as trying to get rights for ecosystems.
Oh, absolutely. Corporations, they're pushing back hard. Anything that might limit their influence, they're against it. They're arguing, hey, we create jobs, we're the engine of the economy. Any restrictions, they say, that'll hurt everyone.
So it's a battle on all sides, legal, political, economic. We've really opened Pandora's box here.
That's what makes it so fascinating, right? This isn't just some intellectual debate. It's about power, who has it, who gets to make the rules, and ultimately what kind of future we're going to have. It affects all of us, whether we realize it or not.
It's real, with real consequences.
Exactly. And as these battles keep going, it's going to be more and more important for people to understand what's at stake. Because the decisions we make today, the laws we pass, even how we talk about personhood, it's shaping the world we're going to live in tomorrow.
You're right. This isn't something we can just ignore, leave it to the lawyers and philosophers. This is a conversation for everyone.
Totally agree. We all have a stake in this. How we define personhood, who gets a voice, what kind of future we're building. So keep asking the tough questions, keep learning, and most importantly, keep talking about it.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back to wrap up our deep dive into this ever-evolving concept of personhood. Don't go anywhere. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. All this talk of corporations being people and rivers having rights feels like we're living in some kind of legal sci-fi movie.
And it's not just happening in courtrooms, This stuff, it makes you question some really fundamental assumptions, culturally speaking.
You're right. Even the way we talk about corporations, like we'll say a company's being greedy or irresponsible, but those are human qualities, aren't they? We kind of instinctively treat them like people, even though they're these abstract entities.
Exactly. And then on the flip side, you've got these movements trying to get legal standing for ecosystems. Like they're saying, hold up, nature isn't just something to be used. It deserves respect, legal protection, the whole 9 yards.
It's like this battle for our collective imagination, right? How we picture these things, corporations, nature, it shapes how we act towards them in the real world.
Which makes you wonder, if we change our language, our stories about these things, could that actually shift things legally? politically.
Instead of getting lost in the legal weeds, maybe we need to start telling different stories about how we relate to corporations, to the environment.
What if, instead of this fight between corporations and the planet, it was about finding that sweet spot, that sustainable balance?
Between, say, needing jobs, economic growth, and, like, the health of the planet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's all connected. We can't have a thriving economy on a dead planet, can we? And we can't have a healthy environment if we keep treating nature like it's something separate from us.
It's like that group we talked about, CELDF. They get that, right? They're not just about protecting nature. They're about giving communities a voice, a say in how their local environment is treated.
Right, recognizing that people have a right to breathe clean air, drink clean water, to have a future, basically. A future that's healthy and sustainable.
And sometimes those rights, they clash with the rights and privileges that these big, powerful corporate persons, the ones we've been talking about, that they've claimed for themselves.
No doubt it's complicated. But that's the beauty of these deep dives, right? The more we understand these things, these interconnected challenges, the better shot we have at navigating them.
So for someone listening who's like, wow, this is a lot, where do they even begin? How do we untangle this whole mess of corporate power, environmental protection, and trying to define what personhood even means?
Well, first things first, don't underestimate the power of staying informed. Keep asking those questions. Keep digging deeper. The more you know about this stuff, the better equipped you'll be to join those conversations, the ones that really matter.
And it's not just about knowing, it's about doing something. Support those organizations doing good work. Talk to your elected officials. Make your voice heard.
Couldn't agree more. Whether it's pushing for stronger environmental laws or choosing to support businesses that are trying to do things sustainably, every little bit counts. It all adds up.
We're all in this together, right? But for now, we're going to have to wrap things up. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep those brains engaged and keep exploring the big ideas that are shaping our world.